Well, good evening, everyone. So last week I talked about maybe talking about something that uh, from this passage in Second Peter that it's my own thoughts, and it's kind of something I want to share. To finish talking about God's celestial battles or cosmic battles. This will kind of go along with that, and so with that, we're going to turn to Second Peter chapter 3, verses 10 to 13. I know that we've read these already, but we're going to read them again tonight. In verse 10, it says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements will be dissolved with fire, and the earth and everything that is done on it will be disclosed. Since all these things are being dissolved in this way, what sort of persons ought you to be in leading lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming day of God, because of which the heavens will be set ablaze and dissolved, and the elements will melt with fire? But in accordance with his promise, we wait for new heavens and a new earth where righteousness is at home." Let's have a word of prayer. Lord, we are thankful that we can be here. I'm thankful that I can do these studies and be able to share them with folks. And Lord, I hope and pray that people look at the things that we talk about or I talk about, and maybe they don't agree exactly with me, but form an opinion of their own and feel free to share it, because that's what it's really all about. And sometimes I am learning sometimes there's not always black and white or right and wrong answers to things in your words, because we just don't have enough information. But again, it's great to be able to share. Lord, we ask that you would give strengthen Brother Bill Petrie's spirit and his family, his wife, and hope they come through okay with the doctor and any issues he have with his heart, and that he would come through that. Just give him strength, Lord. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name, amen. So the question I ask myself concerning this passage is the word heaven. This word occurs 3 times in this passage, verses 10 through 13. And it's interesting that we have heavens that are being set ablaze and dissolved, and the elements will melt with fire. So then we have in verse 13 is a discussion of waiting for new heavens. And so the question that I have to ask myself is, number one, Peter's never been to heaven, so he doesn't know what the old heaven's like. Why is there to be a new heaven? Is there there's folks there now. I now believe that there are people there now, and they didn't know what the old heaven looked like before they got to the new heaven, wherever they might be in the new heaven. So, we think of heaven as heaven. That's where God lives. David has said that, and we read that in the Psalms and other places in the Old Testament. To them, heaven is just where God was. It's not really until you get into the middle period between the Old Testament and the New Testament that it's probably towards the end of that. And I think it comes from Zoroastrianism and other things, but the Jewish angelology and the levels of heaven. So they started to kind of look at things a little different. And even Paul said that he knew someone that went to the third heaven. So what was wrong with heaven that it needs to be made new? And interestingly enough, again, as I said, I have on my eSword 53 commentaries, and I have commentaries all behind me. Hardly anybody discusses this. Most of the discussion is on what relates to us as human beings, which is absolutely natural. And there's some other things which I'll share with you that I've read about what people think is meant by heavens here. And I'm not so sure that when I read it to you that that's absolutely the case. And I don't think those people could tell me that's the case either. So why would Peter be concerned or need to talk about a new heaven? So Peter is a Jewish man. So he thinks somewhat like a Hebrew, which we'll get into here a little bit. So I am fairly sure that his idea of the heavens is completely different from our idea of the heavens, other than the heavens are where God lived. It's unlikely that when Peter or Paul or I would say Jesus, but probably not Jesus because he knows the difference, but that they would make a substantial difference between the atmosphere I breathe, the dark space above, where the stars are, and the planets are. It's all the heavens. Everything above is the heavens, and the ultimate heaven, as Paul says, far above the heavens, because there's heavens and then the far above, is where God is. And that's probably the extent to their thinking. I didn't go and look up what the science of the day was in Peter's time, but if there was a science of the day, I'm pretty sure Peter probably wasn't that concerned with it, of what the atmosphere was. So I honestly believe here that he is referring to the heavens where God lives. So last week I shared thoughts on what the elements were. And hopefully some of you might have had a chance to look at that to see what you thought for yourselves. If not, you certainly should, because it's kind of going to go along with what we talk about tonight, because I think what you're going to see is my feeling is that there's some type of parallel thing going on between heaven, the celestial beings in the heavens, who are opposed or not opposed to God, and what's going on here in Peter's time. Not that they worshipped exactly like the Hebrews worshipped. They didn't do animal sacrifices and all those types of things, but there's definitely something happening up there. There's some type of system that I think has gone awry, and we'll look at why that is. And so the elements on the earth being disclosed is a judgment. And I think we see probably going to be the same type of thing in the heavens. It's going to be laid open, laid bare. That's what it means when something is disclosed. It's brought to light. In John 3:19-21, it says, "And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds have been done in God." And so this, of course, has to do with, it goes back to the Jewish religious system, and the elements. And of course, Jesus is talking to people who are Jewish. That's the people that he came, because they were the people that were lost that he's trying to bring back. And so he's talking to them. In fact, in this passage, he's talking to a Pharisee, Nicodemus. So that's where his focus is. And that's not to say that this doesn't have application to any time, because it does. If you're someone who Bars come to mind because they say, people go to bars. It's always dark. The windows are dark. You can't see in, because that's where evil things happen. And that's generalized, of course. I don't want to offend anybody who still goes to bars, but people go in bars, and you frequently see people drunk coming outside, smoking, and they got loud music and whatever else goes on. And so you have all these things, and they're in the dark, and they want to stay in the dark when they're talking about these things or seeing these things or doing whatever they're not supposed to be doing. They don't want it to be seen. And that's not just in front of God. That's also in front of their fellow neighbors, fellow human beings, people with any kind of conscience. When they're doing something that's not correct, or they feel guilty, or their conscience tells them they shouldn't do something, they don't want everybody else to know about it. And so, think about whitewashed tombs. This is the people that he's talking to. So not only is there going to be end to that system, but God will be judging it, and those who perished in the physical portion of its demise. So all those that stayed in Jerusalem, hundreds of thousands or over 1 million. I guess hundreds of thousands could equate to 1 million, but I've read different numbers of the amount of people that were in Jerusalem when Rome wiped it out. All those people died, and they were going to be judged. So they were receiving a judgment on earth, which is, we could say, the physical portion of the judgment, because it was prophesied this is going to happen because of this reason. And Jesus told them all the reasons it was happening. They could have read the reasons it happened in the Old Testament. And that was a judgment against that city, against that temple, and against the people who supported this, who lived it. And so also we know Hebrews 9:27 tells us that, we die once, and then we have a judgment. And so these people were also judged. The other thing we got to look at with Peter is the earth. So it says the earth and all those that were on it will be opened up to this demise. So you think of why the earth? Well, we know the earth still exists today. It's still standing today. Nothing's happened to it. Mostly Peter is saying the earth because of the people that were on the earth in the locations he's talking about. The works have been done on the earth. And so it makes the realm earthly. And then also, because we're looking at this, we have the earthly realm where these things have happened. So the earth is included. And then we have the heavenly realm, which is also going to be dissolved and made new. And it's interesting. One thought that came to mind was Abel. God said to Cain, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the soil, from the earth. You think about any place in the prophets. I didn't get any references, but I've read them before. But you could think about all the acts of injustice done by the Jews against their own people and their neighbors. And often God said, innocent blood, you shed blood. You're quick to shed blood. And so whether literally they were really murdering people or people died because of things they did, there was some type of responsibility that they shouldered, whether they knew it or not, because of innocent life. And so those would be things possibly that the earth was hanging on to. And so when everything is dissolved and it's all laid open, all those things were going to be taken care of. Of course, the cross took care of a lot, but as I'm looking at this, the cross is like a beginning point to something that was going to happen. So the cross is ultimately the victorious portion of the whole thing, but it set in motion a series of events that was going to happen up to the end. And so I think that's something to ponder about the blood in the ground. But ultimately, I think mostly it's just because it's trying to separate. So what is going on in the heavens? All of creation, including the heavens, is one. So God made it all. It's one in it's really one in the purpose it was supposed to serve, all of it. Any beings in the heavens themselves, however the heavens are structured, whatever type of authority systems they have set up, are going to be similar, I believe, to what we find among humanity. And God created the heavens and the earth. He created all of it together. He created angels, messengers, the elders, the 24 elders that sit on the throne, the councils that we read about in the scripture. All of these involve beings that are in the heavens that God created. It probably could be said to be debatable when they were created, but the one thing I know is that in Colossians 1:15-16, it says he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. It's natural as a man or a woman or a human being, someone who lives in the flesh. When I read this, my focus is most of the time on what's happening with the human race. And though we do talk about what's happening in the heavens, it never seems to be a full topic of, okay, well, all things in heaven. What are all these things? We don't know what they all are. That's part of the invisible. But we do know that there is something there. There are power structures. There are beings. They're mentioned throughout Scripture. Someday, maybe I'll ask God. I'm like, how come you didn't include a book in the Bible that didn't condense all these mentions into one and explain to me what was going on in the heavens? And he would probably say, because you weren't in the heavens. It's not your concern. But it is a concern somewhat because we read it. And so, if you're like me, you pick things up and maybe I go too far with it, but you wonder. So the other part that we looked about in the cosmic battles of God was the influence that celestial beings had on humanity. There's a lot going on in the celestials, in the heavens, and a lot of it spilled over onto the earth. And that is going to go along with all being created, everything created, with Jesus being the firstborn. So Jesus is you picture it as there's God, however that looks. God's a spirit. I don't know what that looks like, but he's in the heavens. We say in the heavens, but he created the heavens. He was before the heavens. He spoke his word, which is I don't want to sound mystical or too over spiritual, but he's a spirit, and he gets something out of him that can make things physical happen. And that's Jesus. Of course, at that time, it's called his word. But anyways, he was first. Then all the other things came to be, including the heavens. So when God is setting up the earth in the Garden of Eden, in my mind, I'm picturing that, it's sometime before that, or even at the same time, he's probably sometime before that, he's created a system, a structure in the heavens, and beings that are an authority structure to each other, and they all have particular responsibilities and things they're supposed to be doing. And when he created the earth, it was a mirror image of what was going on in the heavens. I mean, we've looked at that before, right? The garden as a picture of the temple, and the temple as a picture of where God is. And I see the temple as a picture of literally where God is. And then who knows with the rest of the heavens how it works out. But it does work out. And we see it, like I said, spilling over into the realm of the earth. We have the first time, which is the serpent in the garden. That is a spiritual being that, if we take scripture for what it says, there was a spiritual being, Satan or otherwise, was in the garden. And it's spoken of, whether it's metaphorical or allegorical or literal, if you want to take it that way, a serpent. And it was in the garden, and it caused problems. It caused a lot of problems between God and man. So it's a celestial being that, in my mind, intruded into what God was doing because it had other purposes in mind, for whatever that might be. So then we had the sons of God coming down because they saw the daughters of men, and they were beautiful, and they desired them. And so they came to heaven. And to me, you might disagree with me and think I'm going too far with it, but that's influence. Beautiful women had an influence on the sons of God. And so the sons of God came to earth so that they could wed these women and take them as their own, and eventually somehow procreate with them and come up with a race of giants, as the Bible calls them. So gods were worshipped by people in the world, whether, again, they were real gods or imagined gods. And it was just an idea of something that had happened in the time frame of Genesis 6. And so people kept worshiping that being, and then maybe added on to it, and their imaginations piled on, and then all of a sudden they have all kinds of different gods. But we looked at that already. So we have Daniel's account of angels fighting with each other. One angel is trying to get a message through, and the prince of Persia, and we're not talking about a human prince, we're talking about a celestial prince. We know in the Song of Moses that God gave as an inheritance to some beings in heaven. I don't think it was just any being. I think, again, there's a power structure, and I think it's like his closest core, and we'll see this in a minute, his closest core of beings, possibly the 24 elders or something along those lines, they got these nations. And, I read Greg Boyd says that it's almost as if God, humankind was his inheritance, but because of what they were doing, and because of the way he saw things going and what he needed to do, he disinherited them, and so gave them to other beings. And there's an adversary that incites David to take a census. Saul went to see a medium, which, of course, a medium is someone that is looking into dead people, and often it's they're in a spiritual state because they have now become a celestial being in essence, and so they're trying to get them to come back to talk with people. And then, of course, we had David's or demons invading human hosts, I'll say it that way, in the time of Jesus. So a lot of the celestial things happen on earth. So the heavens had a very real influence on humanity. If you read through the scriptures, where you talk about celestial beings and you read the situations that they found themselves in with humans, they had, I would say, a very strong influence on people or how people thought. So the question I ask, if it's like a mirrored state, did humanity have influence over the heavens? So for argument's sake, if the only real period of celestial interaction before Jesus' time was Genesis 6, and perhaps beautiful women, we know that every thought of man, everything in his heart, everything in his mind was continually evil. So you almost have to wonder what was going on. I used to take it as, women were just doing their thing as wives and daughters, and an angel looks down and says, "Oh, well, she's got a beautiful face," and decide you want to be with her. But now I almost wonder the state of humanity at that time, what was actually going on that drove these beings to come down. I think Paul, I just thought of this. Paul said somewhere, a woman's got to be, possibly in Corinthians, she's got to cover her head. And I've heard some people say that's because there's that real, in fact, perhaps the following verse or something says something along the line about angels looking down. You want to, a woman wants to keep her head covered because at that time, that's the type of things that they thought. And so humanity was worshiping these beings in outlandish ways. Human sacrifice, animal sacrifice. We know that they had, I don't want to be crude, but they had orgies. And you can only imagine what happened with those. And they were all involved around worship. And so you kind of picture, you're a celestial being. I know it's hard, but you're a celestial being and you're looking down on earth and you're thinking, wow, look at the way they're worshiping. And there is no such being as what they're saying, but I know the being that they base that off of. And you almost got to wonder, their thoughts about what's going on between God and humanity and what's the deal. Or some of them, because we know they're opposed to God, say, hey, look, those people are way opposed to God. So you kind of see this, even though it's not stated, I think there's a possibility that there's thought processes going on in these beings, and that's why interactions happen in the first place. So I don't think it's a stretch to say some of them probably enjoyed the fact that human beings worship that way, just because that meant they weren't worshiping God, who they were against in the first place. Psalm 82, we're not going to read it, but it describes a council of heaven where God accuses celestial beings of not properly using their influence. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's telling them, you have a certain portion that was given to you, and your job is to use your influence as much as far as that could possibly go, to make sure that the poor were taken care of, the needy were taken care of, the weak, all the things that we could say that Israel also didn't do. Injustice. God expected that they would be using their influence over humanity to make sure that people were treated in a just manner. And that goes along with, like I said before, some type of authority or power structure. And so God, to me, when I read that passage, he's delegating. He's saying, this is for you. These nations are for you. So I want you to do this, this, and this. But according to that passage, they weren't doing it. And of course, they were going to be judged for not doing it. And their judgment was that they would die like men on the earth. What that could possibly look like, I have no idea. But it certainly does spark off the imagination. Maybe there's a movie in the works in my mind there. Just kidding. I wouldn't have the first idea on how to do something like that, but my imagination does wander. You look at, what does God mean by that? Is he going to actually turn a spiritual being into a human so that they can live on the earth? And my guess is that their judgment to die like men on the earth isn't just to come down as a man and instantly die. It is to come down as a man or human being and live the very injustices that they were influencing people the wrong way. Their influence and their partners in crime, you would say, would be the super rich that didn't care about the poor and those types of things. Then we know that Satan, and I think this is the same type of counsel. So God has this counsel of his closest counsel, of his closest beings, the ones that you could say are in the power structure. They're around God, and I have read, and I think it might make sense that they're around God all the time. When God goes anywhere in heaven, they're always with him. When he said, let us go down and see what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, I think that it's possible that the us doesn't just include him and the word, but it could include him and his council, because that's what a council is. A council is a group of people that center around a head figure or a head idea or whatever it might be, and they give it advice. They share things. They might be delegated responsibilities, and they report on their responsibilities. They might be reporting on what's going on in this nation or that nation. Not that God couldn't know those things, but he created all these beings for a reason. And so it's interesting to think about it in that way. But Satan in Job appears in this council. And, in all the things I've read about this, I think it's possible, as some guys I've read say, that Job was not invited, or Satan was not invited. He wasn't an invited guest. This is God's counsel. And they're talking about things that are going on in the world and in the heavens. And along comes Satan, or the adversary, or the accuser, as the word might be, accuser, makes his way uninvited into the council. And so when God asked him, well, what do you see that's going on? He makes his way in, and I think he's intruding. And I think that God sees him there and decides, well, let's see what this guy has to say. And of course, he's wandering on the earth, no inclination where he's wandering. He's just wandering. He's free to wander. And I think that's also important to understand about these celestial beings. They're free to make decisions and choices and to do things that they want to do. They're not, sometimes we think of angels as in they're stuck with God, or they don't have any other choice, or they just do what God wants them to do. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, if you remember the passage where he wants to send a lying spirit, and so one of the celestial beings volunteers to become that. So God didn't assign it. It was just an idea, I think, that God had to accomplish something. And so one of the beings says, oh yeah, I'll do it. So that's when you kind of look at that, you almost look at heaven and its authority structures and power structures similar to what happens on earth. And I think that's the idea I'm trying to get across. So The book of Revelation talks about the 24 elders, and whether it's the same, that's a different terminology, but I think there was some type of close counsel around God, and then under them came others. So definitely influence going on over humanity. And if in Psalm 82, these guys, whatever they might be, were taken mentally in their thinking to side with the rich guy who took advantage of people because he was rich and powerful, then that's influence. They were influenced by certain human beings, certain power structures that were on the earth. Some say that all involved around Israel. That could be. And because of that, the influence they were supposed to give was, it was skewed to a certain way because it was attractive to them. So again, there's influence, I think, going both ways. You could take that for what it is. That's my thought on it. There's not a whole lot in the scriptures about that other than the things I just mentioned. But I think when you think it through, and understand that the celestial beings are beings that have a free will just like we do, and they think just like people do. They might think differently as celestial beings, but they have a thought process. You can see that it's not a stretch, I don't think, to see that interplay between them. So the other thing that we see is that Peter, as we said, was a Jew, and his mind is inclined towards Hebrew thought. Has to be, because that's who he is. So he grew up that way. It's the things they learn as they grow up, and different things about creation, and the purposes of creation. But in the Hebrew thought, everything in creation is intricately intertwined. Nothing stands on its own. I think in modern times we've developed this mindset that, what I do really doesn't affect that many people. I can do this and I can do that, and it has no effect. But it can have an effect. Obviously, if you it actually still has an effect. Say you have a family and you're unhappy with your family, so you shut yourself away in your study all the time and watch movies on TV or do whatever, or go hang out with the guys instead of with your family. That has an effect on somebody. The fact that they don't have that relationship with you affects them, and that affects their mood, which affects other family members and friends. It might affect them at work, and it goes on and on and on. There's nothing that we do that's in a vacuum. And this was how the Jewish folks thought. Terence Fretheim, who I've used many times, he's a professor somewhere. I can't remember where, but he's written a lot of books, many on open theism, which is where I learned of him from. But he says that the biblical world in the Hebrew mind is like that of a spider web. If you sometimes Lisa and I will be sitting on the porch in the summer, and we might see a spider on the porch making a web, and if the light hits it just right, you can see how intricate it is, and you can see him spinning the web. And being the evil person that I am, sometimes you just want to reach out and touch it, and so I do. And then what happens? The spider runs back up into the corner because no matter where I touch that web, he's going to feel it. And that's how the Jewish mind worked with creation. So everything, heavenly and earthly, because remember, when they looked at creation, it was more about its purpose and what did it do, rather than anything scientific. And to them, the heavens, you can read throughout the Old Testament everywhere that the heavens change and do things according to what happens on the earth with Israel. One place in particular is Hosea 4, 1 through 3. It says, "Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel, for the Lord has an indictment against the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or loyalty, and no knowledge of God in the land. Swearing, lying, and murder, and stealing, and adultery break out, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore, the land mourns, and all who live in it languish, together with the wild animals and the birds of the air. Even the fish of the sea are perishing. Now, I have doubts that the fish of the sea were truly perishing, but the idea is that everything is interconnected. And you read many times when Israel was judged, it didn't just include people being punished, but creation felt the reverberations of it also. They could have been part of God using it as part of the judgment. There are times where you read it and it just like this, it just, their sin is so great that the animals, the birds of the air and the fish are perishing. And that goes to show that it's, to them, it's all the same. The creation is the same. So they see something terrible happening to them. They write all kinds of things about, what we have, mountains skipping and valleys breaking open, all kinds of things that we read about. And it includes everything, not just people, but all of creation. It's pretty amazing when you read it and you think about it in this way. You think about the curse of Cain. It says the ground was not going to be as abundant for him. Well, it didn't say that Cain was never going to grow anything and eat anything that came out of the ground. It just said it wasn't going to be like it was before. So what was it like before? Was it everything that, Cain had the ultimate green thumb, that everything he planted was just beautiful and gorgeous and just amazing. And now he's going to have to struggle, kind of like Adam, right? I mean, now the things that Cain plants, might not be as good. But that, that's part of, it involves it, all part of creation, judgments and everything. In back, all the way back to Genesis 1, human beings were given the earth. They were given the animals. They were given the plants, fish, birds, all of it. They were put in to oversee it. Adam and Eve were to protect the garden. They were to watch over the garden. You could say, well, what are they going to watch over it for? Adam wasn't, sometimes I think a lot of times we think of Adam in the garden as a gardener. He was meant to be there to make sure everything got watered and grew right, and he took care of the garden. But when we look at the Hebrew words and what they mean, and even in some translations, he was there to oversee, to protect. And I think he was there to protect it by way of his ethical actions and his moral ethics between him and God, and his walking with God, to make sure that he stayed true to God, so that any beings that happen to make their way into the garden, which they certainly could, would never find a weak point where they could destroy it or ruin it. If you think of the garden as a picture of the temple, which I know my dad's looked at, and I know I've looked at, just in the design of the temple, I think we did a whole thing of, the pomegranates and the leaves. It just was a picture. The temple that Solomon built was a picture of Eden. And just in that, we know that the priests, their job was, they had many jobs, but one of their jobs was to make sure that the temple was protected. They oversaw it so that there wasn't abominations and there wasn't, slaying people in the temple and those types of things. And they failed, just like Adam failed. And so the temple that was a picture of heaven on earth, Solomon's temple, and the temple thereafter, terrible things happened in it that wasn't supposed to happen, because it was supposed to be a picture of heaven. where those things would never happen. And so God wanted that. He wanted that state to be present here. And we know, of course, that didn't happen. And so history afterwards took place. But, you know, we see that there's always been this opposition towards God by human beings and by celestial beings. So to me, everything that we've read and studied about what's gone on here on this earth, why should it not be the same in the heavens? And I think that's exactly, at least where my thought is here. It might seem pretty weak to some people, but to me, I think it's something to honestly think about. That the heavens were just like the earth. We had the old, and it had to be made new because the old had broken down. And God made a way where the new couldn't break down in his sight. And that was through his son and through the cross. And so everything is going through a process where it will come to the realization of what is new. And I think was the same thing in the heavens. Obviously, there were celestial beings against him. There was a breakdown of the power structure. And so there are portions of the heavens, maybe not, we'll say the far above, but there were parts of the heavens that had been become corrupted. Because when these beings, these anti-creational beings, did the things they did, influenced people the way they influenced them, didn't do the things they should do, that is what? It's sin. Just like with men, it was sin. So there was a problem. There's a couple places we talk about the heavens and things on earth affecting it. In Jeremiah 51:9, I'm not going to read it, but the idea is that the sins of Babylon were so great that they have piled up and reached into the heavens. And these sins, of course, would be judged. Haggai 2:21, speaking of the building of the new temple, was Zerubbabel. It says that God was about to shake not just the earth where the temple was going to be built, but the heavens, shaking the heavens and the earth. And you wonder, well, why does he need to shake the heavens? And you could say, well, he's just talking about thunderbolts and lightning and thunder. I don't see it that way. And I don't think that's how the Hebrew mind saw it either. Because again, to them, it's all the same creation. It flows together. In fact, to them, probably in Zerubbabel's time, they still saw the earth as a huge flat expanse that stood on pillars over top of the seas and had a dome for a sky. Just like if you went to a modern day Coliseum to see a hockey game, we'll say it had a dome, and in that dome were lights and stars that signified when we do certain things in our old covenant worship. And that's what it was. So to them, heavens were the heavens. God was shaking those heavens, which I think is very telling. In Revelation, it's in chapter 18, it talks about Babylon the Great, which we know is, or we believe is Jerusalem. Still, many commentators say it's Rome, and other ones say it's some future power. But the sins were so great, so iniquitous, and there were so many of them that they just, if you just picture, one of the commentators say, just picture piles of leaves, just wet leaves, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it was heaven, in heaven. And then we talked about the beauty of a woman enticing a man. I already mentioned that God granted a nation for each certain celestial beings. and that possibly these could be the same beings of Psalm 82. So these were all anti-creational forces of darkness. And really, honestly, it kind of falls back to the whole discussion of God's cosmic battles. Such forces existed, and they had to be finally destroyed. If the beings themselves aren't destroyed, then they're brought to a place in their relationship with their creator, just like we're brought to a place in our relationship with our creator, where we're reconciled. And I think that same process, I think I mentioned some time ago that the cross, I believe, it was for more than human beings.
That's right.
It was for creation, all of creation. Of course, we see, because we can think and we can reason, we see the huge ramifications of the cross for us and for our history. But when we look at the history of celestial beings, don't they also need a way to be reconciled with their creator? And so the whole system that is in the heavens is included in Peter's passages. And it's included in the passages in Revelation, because there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with the beings in them. And they have to go through the same process. They have to be taken down, laid bare, judged, and made new. So there had to be a new earth and a new heaven. Heaven itself. I know I jumped ahead already because my thoughts were ahead of myself, but in Hebrews 9, we read in verse 24, for Christ did not enter a sanctuary made by hands, human hands, a mere copy of the true one, but he entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. What heaven is heaven itself? It's God's heaven, where God is sitting, where God is enthroned. And Jesus appeared to him there. So if it's a picture of the temple, then it's in the Holy of Holies. So there was a room before that and a court before that. And then there was an outside of the temple. Even more amazing, we read that Jesus went through all the temple, and there's a copy of the temple. But in Revelation, in the end, what does it say? There isn't one, because it's God. So if there was one, it's not there anymore. God did away with it. He did away with the one in the heavens because there was a true one. He did away with it when he made the new heavens, because it wasn't needed anymore. Because now he's there for everyone. He's there for all human beings. He's there for all of the celestial beings. They got a new heaven. In Revelation 20, it says that the heavens fled away, because the earth too, because there was no more room for them. There was no place for them to be found, so they had to flee. And in that passage, we read about how it was the following passages, it becomes remade. So in all of this, I will conclude with thoughts for your consideration. Peter is not speaking about sky. He's not speaking about space, where the galaxies are. Peter didn't even know that there were millions of galaxies, which is just mind-blowing in itself. He didn't even know that. He knew that there was a sun, a moon, and stars, and they had a purpose in his mind, and it wasn't for all the things that we think scientifically. As Dan said Sunday morning, the cosmos is something that the word has changed from what it meant originally. Cosmos being an orderly society or orderly system. Of course, the heavens could be said to have a cosmos. So Peter is speaking about the heavens. We don't know what the heavens look like other than the thing that we read from Paul. And if you want to read mystics and things about Jewish angelology, you can read some about what the heavens are. The book of Enoch discusses, which of course we saw was included in the Septuagint, in the Bible Jesus had to read. It included Enoch. So, you know, I do have that. I never go back to that for some reason to look at these things. I should. And that Peter is speaking about where celestial beings lived, and that the whole process of reconciliation and the cleansing and the purging also takes place. So there's the Jewish elemental system, and then there was the celestial system, which included the devil or Satan. And in Paul, in Romans 16:20, Paul says that Satan was to be shortly crushed under the feet of the people he was talking to. Satan was finally defeated. And I think all that took place AD 70-ish. It all, not just on earth, the same thing was mirrored in the heavens. And then finally in Revelation 21, we see, it says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." This is what Peter's describing. And of course, I mentioned the sea before as not being H2O. The beautiful sea I used to get to look at when I was in the Air Force all the time in Virginia. But the sea that God pushed back, it's gone. It's all gone. The very place where Yam and all these powers lived has been destroyed. It's gone. And so, you know, I have some other notes in here, but they're not really necessary. Other than I think there's some dual purpose to the things that Peter is talking about. You know, it's pretty amazing if you look at all this and you really look at it and you think, you know what, someday I am going to really be in a spiritualized state, a spirit, not spiritualized, a spiritual state, and I am going to be higher than many of these other beings. It's a pretty amazing thing. You know, Jesus was made a little lower than them. Men were made a little lower than them. But that's going to be reversed. And so the way I see it now is in this new heaven, you know, things go exactly as God had planned them in the beginning. That's where I'm going to leave it. And, you know, if you all have my email, I get emails mostly from Daniel Kramer, sometimes from my father, but and my mom has emailed me too, but nobody else. So please, if you have things to share with me or thoughts on the things that I'm saying, please shoot me an email. I know Gail said that she tried that and I didn't look at it, and I apologize. And I'm very good now about looking at my emails. Promise.